Let's go ahead and take a seat, please. First, I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. It's a great day to have a helicopter landing. And it's even more of a great day to have the University of Chicago aeronautic team here with us today. On my right is Michelle Lambright. Michelle is one of the trauma air nurses with the University of Chicago, and she is going to be your instructor today. It's a very genuine, obviously great privilege to have her here. So why don't you welcome Michelle to us. So it's about 70 minutes, 75?
It'll be, the classroom portion is about 45 to 50 minutes, depending on how fast I talk. And then outside, because the helicopter is able to make it weather permitting, it's looking like we'll be able to, but that'll be about an hour or so, just depending on how many questions we have and how much you guys want to check out the helicopter.
Okay, all you.
First of all, thank you everybody for having me. Thank you for being here. Last time, I think we worked with EMS Road Docs. My colleague Kyle had taught the class about 2 years ago. And so I'm excited to be able to be here and teach the class to you guys today. So like Steve had mentioned, my name is Michelle. I've been with the UCAN team almost 3 years now. I'm going to be fully transparent and say, sorry if I'm short of breath. My little guy is going to be here in about 6 weeks. So forgive me if I sound a little winded today. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to talk about, actually let me backtrack. So my understanding is that we have a variety of disciplines in the audience, right? So some EMTs, some nurses, some paramedics, is that right? Has anybody ever been involved in landing an aircraft before, been on scene with it? Okay, excellent. So some people have some experience. If you have any questions, very informal, please interrupt me, ask whatever comes to mind. So today we're going to talk about helicopter and landing zone safety, aircraft utilization, so why would you call for an aircraft? And then the crash recovery portion is the end of the lecture. That's more tailored towards fire departments if they were responding to us if we were involved in a crash, but we can still talk about that towards the end of the presentation. If we can go to the next slide. Do I have a technology person in here? Like it's not skipping my slide.
Oh, okay. It's skipping here, but it's not up there, so.
Are you in notes mode or presentation?
Presentation.
Okay.
There's always something, isn't there?
Yes.
That's not going up to that.
Well, there you go.
Excellent. Okay.
Good job.
Thank you. All right. So I always like to talk about our mission statement. Unfortunately, I always like to mention her, but our chief flight nurse, Kelly Holdren, she passed away last November. And so she worked really hard to build the culture that we have at our team. So we always just like to talk about our mission statement at UCAN. So our UCAN team is dedicated to providing quality and comprehensive care via air and ground. So if for whatever reason we weren't able to fly, weather was not permitting, we do transport patients by ambulance as well. We're a safe and efficient team. We provide specialized tertiary care and superior clinical expertise. There's a lot of training that goes into our flight nurse roles, and so we have a little bit higher autonomy, which is pretty awesome. We provide superior healthcare in a safe, compassionate, and professional manner. So objectives, like I mentioned, today we're going to talk about inclusion criteria for calling a helicopter, or HEMS is what we call it, helicopter EMS. We're going to identify criteria for establishing a temporary landing zone. So what does that mean? With some of the fire departments that we work with, we have pre-designated landing zones. So it was already approved by our chief pilot. Our chief flight nurse has looked at it and said, yep, this is a great place for us to land. But if you're ever in a situation where you need to set up a temporary landing zone, something happened on a highway, something happened on a backcountry road, you can still set up a temporary landing zone. We'll go through what that looks like. And then we're gonna discuss safety operations around the helicopter, how to keep you guys safe, and discuss post-crash recovery. So a little bit about our program. Our program was started in 1983. We were the first hospital-based aeromedical program in the Chicagoland area, and we still are today. So some of the other programs that you'll see out there, no team is better than the other. It just means that we're based out of the hospital, and then there's community-based aeromedical programs that are out there. So for example, I know this is Southside, but Lifestar is based out of Joliet. They're a community-based, and so we're based out of the hospital. We're a team of specialty trained nurses. We have expanded over the last couple of years, but there's about 20 of us now. Fun fact, about 25 of our nurses are having babies right now, so.
What's going on in that side?
We're gonna be a little short-staffed to go.
Bring the water.
Yeah. So our team, we're a leader and resource in heme safety and research. Dr. Blumen is our medical director. He's well known in the industry. He's been with our team for a very long time. He's done a great job creating the safety culture that we have, and he does a ton of research of what goes into HEMS crashes. They do happen across the country. If you ever watch the news, you'll see, there was, I think not long ago, there was a helicopter crash down in Kentucky. So he really looks at the data and, what caused that crash to happen. And then also our teams is CAMES accredited, which is pretty cool. So UCAN operations. So what is our program specifically? What does that look like for on the operations side? We do about 1,500 plus transports annually. I have to actually edit this. I want to say that that's gone up over the last couple of years. So 70% of that is interfacility. So that's hospital to hospital. That's us flying out to a community hospital, out with lower resources, and then bringing them to a higher level of care. So we don't necessarily say we were responding, we got a call all the way up here in the north suburbs. We're not going to take a patient just back to University of Chicago. We'll take them to the closest and most appropriate for them. So if that means we're flying them to a closer level of trauma center, we will do that as well. So 70% interfacility and 30% scene response. So say, you guys were out on the road and you wanted to call us to a scene. That would be us working with the fire department. So we do that about 30% of the time. Our service area is 200 nautical miles surrounding our base. So sometimes it's not as common, but sometimes we'll fly up to Michigan, sometimes we'll fly up to Wisconsin. Yes, Steve?
David has a great question. Would you pose it, please?
Yes.
What's it?
About wind level.
Where's the closest level one hospital from here?
From here. I'm more familiar with the southern suburbs. If we were, Lutheran generally, I was going to be my guess. If we were ever in a position where we were called to the scene and we didn't know, that's something that we could quickly communicate to our dispatch. Hey, I need to go to the closest level 1 trauma center. Where are we flying? Who has a helipad? So that could be a quick decision.
Michelle, when are incidents not a level 1 and a helicopter's called?
So we'll go through different diagnoses and things like that, different traumatic injuries. Recently, they have changed the trauma criteria, I want to say, for what would be a level 1 trauma injury, and then what would be deemed appropriate for like a level 2 trauma center. Your local EMS is going to be really great at that and triaging and where patients need to go. But we can talk about injuries in a little bit. So our standard crew, so say I'm on shift today, who's working? What does that look like? We have 1 pilot and 2 nurses. There's teams out there that fly nurse paramedic. Specifically our team, we fly nurse. And then sometimes we'll have a 3rd rider with us. So if you see an extra person, we do have emergency medicine residents that do ride time with us for a couple of weeks just to get some experience out in the field. And then of course our communication specialist or our dispatchers. So our aircraft specifically, you see at the top it says N365 Uniform Charlie. That's our tail number. So something that some people like to do, I like to nerd out and do it myself, but you can download the app FlightAware. So if you were ever out in the field, you wanted to call for a helicopter, that would be how you would track our helicopter and see how far out we are. So hey, we called for UCAN, you put in our specific tail number, and you can kind of flight follow us. But so our helicopter is an EC-145, or Eurocopter. Just kind of some fun facts about the aircraft itself. We fly at 125 knots. Ground speed for that is about 130 to 140 miles per hour, depending on whether we have a tailwind or not. Headwind, tailwind could be slower or faster. Our aircraft is equipped, or our team is equipped to transfer patients, neonatal patients, pediatric patients, all the way up to elderly patients. We do high-risk OB transports, so kind of everything in between. We're about 50% pediatric, 50% adult, so all of our nurses are required to have experience in both areas, peds and adult. And then we're also equipped, the aircraft itself can transport patients who are in an isolette, so neonatal ICU patients, patients who require impellas, ventricular assist devices, or otherwise known as VADs. We can do ECMO transports and balloon pumps as well. And then this is something I always like to highlight. I feel like this is something that maybe that people are kind of like less knowledgeable about, but we can transport 2 patients. So this is not as common, but this is more for like a mass casualty incident. So part of the service that we can provide is, say you have a mass casualty incident in your area and there's not a lot of resources, or the hospitals close by are being overwhelmed with patients, right? So we can transfer 2 patients. What that would look like is a more stable patient and then a more critical patient. We have the ability to immobilize both patients, so on a long backboard if need be. That's just something that we would need to know in advance because we need to do a reconfiguration of one of our seats in the aircraft. So we do have the ability to do so it's something you can kind of keep in your back pocket if you need it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, you said the flight aware, is it the flight aware, which has that?
Either or. I personally use the Flight Aware. I think there's another one called like Flight Radar or something like that, but yeah. They should all pull it up though. You guys can check too later when the aircraft is coming out. You can see like it'll give you their lift time from University of Chicago, and then it tells you it'll update every couple of seconds. So it's kind of cool. A lot of our paramedics out in the field, if they call us, they like to check that.
Yeah.
Like, okay, how far out are we? How long do we have before the team is here? What interventions can we do before we get there? So specialty training. So for the nurses that are on our team, I always like to highlight this too, just so you guys know if you're ever handing over a patient to us, what care can we provide while we're in the air, in the helicopter. So we can do RSI intubation for all patient populations. So neonatal, pediatric, adult. We've got all the equipment on board to do so. We can do cripes, surgical airways. We can do needle decompression if a patient has a collapsed lung or a pneumothorax. We can also do finger thoropostomies, pericardiocentesis, so draining fluid from the pericardium if a patient had like a blunt injury to the chest. We do have blood on board. Another one I always like to highlight. For our trauma patients, a lot of the times they're losing blood, they need blood, right? In the field, unfortunately, for some of the medics, you're kind of like up the creek with no paddle, right? You have to give them lactated ringers or normal saline, but we do have blood on board. So we carry 2 units of whole blood, 1 unit of packed cells, and 1 of PRBCs.
How do you know how much blood to give? Or what the blood levels need to be? Are you using shock index to make that?
We'll usually look at the shock index, and then usually, to be honest, our patients are pretty sick and they're in extremis, so a lot of the times we're using our whole cooler. We'll always give 1 unit of blood and then reassess. How does our patient look? How are our vitals? Did we respond? Were we responsive to fluid? And then kind of go from there.
Do you use any other volume expanders, like Pespane or anything like that?
We just have blood, and we have LR and normal saline on board. The other thing too that's really great is that we have a good relationship with our trauma team at University of Chicago. So if we were ever out in the field coming from the scene, we have no diagnostics, right? We don't have a chest x-ray, we don't have a CT, we don't have any imaging. So we're solely relying on our assessment skills of what injuries the patient has. So what we can do is we can radio back home and say, hey, we need the trauma team to meet us on the helipad. We think we have a patient who's a good candidate for a direct to OR. So we can completely bypass the ER, and if they need us on the helipad and they're like, yeah, this patient needs to go to the OR. Usually it's an injury to the belly, right, internal bleeding of some sort. But that's kind of something nice too, that we can get the patient where they need to go in a shorter amount of time.
So you're using field ultrasound or you're not?
We do.
Okay, so that's a great
Yes.
indicator for where you go next.
Yes, we use it, we can do fast exams, and then we also we'll use it for like lung sliding, because in the aircraft, you can't hear, right? So I can't put in my stethoscope and listen, does the patient have lung sounds or do they not? You get that good baseline assessment, and then on the way, do they have lung sliding, do they not? Am I concerned about a pneumo or a hemothorax? Things like that. We've got a lot of tricks up our sleeve that we can use. So we can also put in chest tubes if needed, and then field amputations as well. So like your true life or limb situation where a patient is a prolonged extrication, the ground EMS personnel can't get the patient out and they're decompensating. That would be a phone home to our medical director, like, hey, we're having a really bad day. But we can do field amputations if need be. Okay, so utilization. Who can call for an aircraft? EMS agencies, the fire service agencies, law enforcement, if a lot of the times, or sometimes I should say, the police department will get on scene, before the fire department does, so they can call for a helicopter too, if they feel like it would be appropriate. Industrial safety officers, we respond a lot out to the steel mills out in northwest Indiana, so the industrial safety officers will call us. And then, of course, hospitals or, smaller community shops, physicians that are out in the community can call us as well. So when to call? Why would you call for a helicopter? Not every reason is listed on here. This is kind of like a general overview, but mostly so for mass casualty incidents or disasters. Perfect example. We responded to the Highland Park 4th of July shooting. So an incident like that. Not only for the patient, but also, if we need to decompress that local hospital. So EMS response, if there's a prolonged extrication, if there's entrapment involved, if there's any crush injury, if the patient was involved in a rollover accident, automatically you can call for a helicopter and be eligible for that. If there's any DOA occupants in a vehicle, right? So if there was a patient that survived and another passenger in the vehicle was DOA, the mechanism was significant enough to kill somebody else, so that the surviving patient then is eligible for a flight to a level 1 trauma center. If there's any fire or explosion, so local burn centers, right? Loyola is a burn center. University of Chicago is also a burn center. We also have adult and pediatric level 1 trauma care. So any burn patients definitely can be flown. If there's drownings, specifically pediatric trauma, and then I kind of like to go a little bit more into the weeds for trauma patients. Our number one patient population now that we transfer are stroke patients, so ischemic or hemorrhagic stroke, but then our close second is trauma. So what kind of trauma patients? Penetrating injuries to the head, neck, torso, or extremities proximal to your elbows or to your knees. Lots of large vessels in there, we know, so you're at a very high risk of bleeding, right? Likely going to need a surgeon for those. If there's amputation proximal to the wrist or to the ankle, crushed, degloved, or mangled extremities, open or depressed skull fractures, paralysis, if there's pelvic fractures, those patients are obviously at high risk of bleeding as well. If you have 2 or more proximal long bone fractures, so your humerus, your femurs, if you have 2 broken, automatically eligible for a flight. And then I always like to highlight the EMS provider judgment. You guys are fantastic at what you do, fantastic at assessing your patients. You know who needs to go to a level 1 trauma center. So EMS provider judgment is always, it's kind of a box that we can check as well to justify why that patient needed a flight. So if your Gestalt 2 is telling you, yeah, this patient looks okay, but I feel like they need to be evaluated, call.
Is it just a single patient, or do you have multiple patients on helicopter?
We can have 2. Yes. So what that would look like is a more stable patient. So we technically only have a cardiac monitor for 1 patient, right? And there's only 2 nurses in the back. But a patient who is more stable could still need an evaluation in the level 1 trauma center. So 1 would be more critical, 1 would be a little bit more stable. And what we would do is kind of do spot checks in between and divide and conquer and come up with a plan between the 2 of us, meaning the 2 nurses in the back. But we can do 2. It's just something that we would need to know ahead of time. Any questions on when to call? Anything else? No. All right, so our standby policy. So this would mean that if you guys were to call and put us on standby, our aircraft is dedicated to your requesting agency for about 20 minutes. So at the end of that 20 minutes, we're either gonna do one of three things. You can either say, yes, we definitely need you, confirmed, we would like you guys to come out. You can extend that time. Hey, we're not sure, EMS is here, they're still, extricating the patient. We need a little bit more time to see if this patient needs to be flown. Okay, great, extend that 20 minutes, or at the end, just cancel. There's no penalty, you're not, nobody's charged for anything, it's just, okay, we don't need you guys, and there's no harm, no foul. So auto launch, so say we were requested up here, and, hey, Arlington Heights needs you guys to respond to a scene. Okay, that would qualify for an auto launch. The reason being is we're greater than, I think it's 15 minutes flight time, so air time, or 25 nautical miles. The reason behind that is we want to get to the patient sooner and get them to where they need to go and get them the most appropriate care. So that would be, if you're further out, you're eligible for auto launch. So we're going to grab our blood cooler, we're going to grab all of our equipment, we're going to start heading your direction. Again, time saver for the patient, reducing time to get to the tertiary facility. And then we're only ever going to enter the scene if we are invited to. So say you guys called, you put us on standby, we auto launch, we're heading your way. We're going to circle until we're welcomed into the scene. It's the ground crew scene, right? So we're never going to come in and take charge, anything like that. And then there's no charge again for standby policy or auto launch. We can head all the way out to your area, we could be circling the scene, and then you could cancel us and say, actually, you know what, we don't need you guys. Thanks so much, and we'll head back home.
Michelle?
Yes?
With the other flights, helicopter, how do they decide who comes?
What do you mean?
Well, you got the one out of Rockford, what was it, flight plan?
Oh,
Like, if you're at a scene, how do you know you guys versus them?
yes, so that's something that can be communicated amongst AirCom. So they're both Air Methods bases, the helicopter that's staged out of Rockford. So a lot of the times what we do is we cover for each other. So say that they were out, their dispatch, AirCom could call us and say, hey, Flight for Life is out on another call right now, they're busy, but Arlington Heights still needs you. And then we can be dispatched from there. It's kind of like phone tree system.
Okay, thanks.
Michelle, what we've done, we've all programmed UCAN's phone number in for your dispatch, and that's our preferred provider, and we'll call first on that.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, I had one where we had open gray matter, we had to come in, and, again, we've used you in the past more than any provider that I can remember.
Okay.
We have all of that programmed in on ourselves.
I love that. We personally love when we can just get called directly from whoever is on scene. But everybody has different protocols. So, some of the departments we work with out in Northwest Indiana, their protocol for, that specific department is they have to call their dispatch, their local dispatch, or they might have to call medical control and get approval to fly a patient out from the scene. But if you have the ability to call us directly from the scene, one person, less games of telephone, love that. Just call us directly. All right, so say you guys are, out in the field and you've decided that a patient needs to be flown. What does that process now look like? So first thing, our dispatcher is going to tell us, hey, we've got a flight request up to, Arlington Heights. And so our pilot is going to do a weather check then. They don't know any patient information, anything like that. The reason behind that is that we don't ever want our pilots to feel pressured to accept a flight. So say there's a 5-year-old that was involved in an ATV accident who's super sick. Not that pediatrics are, any more important than adult patients, but we never want our pilot to make a decision of safety based on the patient. So they're going to do a weather check. Is it safe for us to accept this flight or is it not? So say that they've accepted the flight. What information do we need? So pre-hospital, we're going to need the name of the caller and callback number, nature and location of the incident. Cross streets are totally fine. We're going to start heading your direction. Usually if there's ambulances, we can see the lights, we'll find you guys. Agency ground contact and radio frequency. So if there's a fire department that's out there, they're going to have or that's responded to the scene, they're going to have a radio frequency that they can let our dispatch know, hey, we're going to be on, I think up here it might be like iFern or iReach, something like that. Hey, that's how you're going to establish ground to air communications. And then of course the number of patients to be transported, 99% of the time going to be one patient, but it could be two. So then we're gonna establish an LZ coordinator. So say that you've called for the helicopter, now they've accepted the flight, they're gonna start heading your way. What do you need to know is the LZ coordinator. So you're gonna have direct communication with the crew if you have a radio. You're gonna select, prepare, and secure a landing zone. And we'll go through the criteria for that. Be knowledgeable about the landing zone requirements. You're going to coordinate all activity around it, and you're going to be designated as the LZ coordinator, and we ask as the LZ coordinator only. So you're not going to be involved in patient care, so you're kind of being pulled in two different directions. If you have the amount of resources on the ground to have that separate LZ coordinator, that would be our preference. And then we'll be dedicated to LZ operations. So what 4 things are you going to look for when you're selecting a landing zone? Location, size, gradient, and surface. Those 4 things. So for location, you want to avoid us flying over the scene directly if you can. Just don't want to blow anything like up in anybody's eyes or anything, or blow any equipment around. Sometimes if we're landing on a scene of an accident, there could be debris from the vehicles, right, from all the damage. So we don't want to blow that around and injure anybody either. You want to avoid vegetation over knee high. So if we're landing in a field, you want to make sure that we're not, the grass isn't super high, or it's like a cornfield where, that's not going to work. We can't pull our stretcher through that. We also have antennas on the bottom of the aircraft that can get damaged, so we just don't want anything like super high. And then of course, don't block the emergency vehicles. Make sure that where we're landing does not block you in. So say a patient was in the back of the ambulance, the aircraft is on the way, you guys land us in an area where we're blocking in the ambulance. What if the patient becomes peri-arrest and now there's no way for you guys to get out, right? The aircraft is in your way, so just make sure you're not blocking in the ambulance. And then avoid obstacles and obstructions. Can anybody tell me what an obstacle or obstruction would be? If you're the LZ coordinator and you're calling stuff out, you've got the air-to-ground comms.
Power lines.
Power lines, yes. Anything else?
Light poles,
Light poles, yes.
water towers.
Yes, water towers. Yes, all those things. I always like to ask, just because there's a variety of things, right? Trees, power lines, all the things you guys mentioned, light poles, what else? Fences, if there's any debris that's blowing around, like big sticks. I think one time I went out to check out a landing zone, there was like a big 2x4 out there. Stuff like that that can either injure you guys or cause damage to the aircraft. We want to be on alert for. All right, so size, 100 feet by 100 feet. Where the aircraft is landing today, I think we talked about, Steve, it's like 200 by 300 feet. It's wide open, it's
Roughly
beautiful.
2x4. You ought to be able to tuck it in.
Yeah, so plenty of space out there, but the minimum requirements for us to land is 100 feet by 100 feet. So gradients, flat surfaces are preferred. Outside the green of the golf course is fantastic, it's flat. We want flat with minimal depression or bumps. So a slight slope is okay, but nothing greater than 5 degrees. Everybody pull out your protractor, make sure it's not greater than 5 degrees. But the reason being is that if we were to land, say like you were on the side of a highway, right, and they have kind of like those runoffs for water and things like that, we can't land on those. We can't get out of the side of the aircraft if we're on a pitch. You're reducing your distance from the ground to the blades, right? So you're putting yourself in more danger. I'm very tall, that would be a risk for me. So just make sure your surface is flat. And approach and depart from downhill only if there is a minimal depression in your landing zone. So surface, we prefer pavement, that's the best. It's easiest to move our stretcher and kind of pull it over to the ambulance. Dirt and grass is okay, but avoid vegetation over knee high. Again, pavement is preferred. No icy or powdery snow. So what we run into is if the surface is too dusty or if there's powdery snow, that can either cause a whiteout or a brownout. So the rotor wash when we're landing the aircraft is going to push all of that up and around the aircraft. The pilot's going to lose visibility. So what we ask is if it's really dusty where you are, have the fire department hose down the area. It's going to let that the dirt down and then prevent a brownout. And can't really do that for powdery snow, going to cause ice and more problems, but if it's dusty, you can definitely do that. So surface, again, we like pavement. I went through that already. So hazmat considerations. So if we were ever called to a scene where there was, it was truly a hazmat scene, we want to select an LZ to avoid the hazardous materials. Notify our dispatch immediately if you guys know that it's a hazmat scene. We do some hazmat training, but we're not fully trained in hazmat. That's fire department, paramedics, that's their jam. They know what to rely on them for decontamination. So basically any patient that is being flown from a hazmat scene, they need to be decontaminated and we need to know about it ahead of time. So notify our dispatch. The FAA requires us to land a minimum of 1 mile away from the hazmat scene, and it has to be upwind. So we're gonna land further. What that looks like, we land 1 mile away from your hazmat scene, and then we're gonna either need to coordinate getting us down to you guys by ambulance, or you guys heading up towards us with the ambulance. So again, all patients must be decontaminated. Avoid contamination of, we want to avoid contamination of the flight crew or the aircraft. I definitely don't want my pilot being contaminated with fumes as he's trying to fly us safely back home. So, and if there's persistent contamination, we cannot fly the patient. So something else that's an obstacle or hazard that's becoming more common are drones. Something kind of cool that I learned recently, if a drone is a specific weight or size, I want to say it's required that it's registered with the FAA. I don't know who regulates that, and I don't know that everybody actually does that. So just something to be mindful of. It's kind of like when there's an accident on a scene and people have their phones out and they want to take pictures and they're completely distracted. That same thing happens to us with drones. People put their drone up, they want to see the helicopter landing, and that's a huge risk for us just because they're small. Sometimes we catch them, sometimes we don't. And so just make sure you're on the lookout for drones as well. So approach and departure paths. We land and take off into the wind. So if you're the LZ coordinator, you want to make sure that you know if it's a windy day, what direction the wind is coming from. The reason we land into the wind is there's stabilizers on the back of the tail of the aircraft. You guys will see that later. It helps keep us stable and straight in the aircraft. So land and take off into the wind. You want to make sure that our aerial pathway, so when you guys look up and around, is free of any obstacles. Somebody asked a really good question at one of the recent classes that I was teaching. They said, how far out do you want us to call out an obstacle? Like, if you can see it, call it out. So a good rule of thumb too is about 1 mile away. So the reason being is that we don't come directly over the scene and drop directly down. We start our approach path way further out. So as we're coming in, there might be an obstacle that you see from the ground, like, oh, I see that power line, but I don't think that'll be a problem. We always say if you see something, say something. So clear of all hazards, and then if you can, shut down both lanes of traffic. Use your resources on the ground. A lot of the times, again, people want to see what's going on. There's a helicopter, there's lots of emergency vehicles. Shut down both lanes of traffic, less likely to cause another accident. So calling off the aircraft. So never assume that we see an obstruction. If you guys have access to a radio and we've established those communications, you can either say the terms abort or go around. That is going to trigger anybody that's in the aircraft, nurses or pilots, to be like, they see something that we don't see, stop, abort landing, and we're going to reassess the situation. If you do not have access to a radio, use our wave up signal. So both hands like this. This doesn't mean we're over here. This means don't land. So if we do that, that'll signal us to say, okay, it's not safe for us to land. So air-to-ground communication, we're going to establish that prior to arrival of the aircraft, usually between the fire department or EMS agency, whoever has access to a radio. We've already established that radio frequency that was communicated to our dispatch. And so prior to arrival of the aircraft, it's going to be between the LZ coordinator and the flight nurse or the pilot. Either one can talk to the ground crew. The flight nurse is going to give you guys an ETA. So, hey, we're 8 minutes out from you guys. We'll see you in a few. Can you give us an update on the landing zone? So, say the crew's coming out today, they're landing at around 11:30. They're going to get in contact about 5 to 10 minutes out, and then they're going to look for any information about the landing zone. So for this one specifically, I would say, hey, you're going to be landing on the golf course just south of the country club. free of obstacles or obstructions. There are some trees on the north side of the landing zone. You've got a parking lot north of the landing zone, but wide open. You know, we'll see you guys in 8 minutes. So that's typically what that communication looks like. And then the ground agency is going to provide that information back. You're going to call out any obstacles or obstructions, and just kind of like we talked about, the 1 to 1.5 miles out. So the perimeter, if you can avoid it, don't use any cones. That's pretty common, but they do blow around pretty easily. So no rope, no cones, tape, barricades, definitely not flares. Sometimes the departments will use those at nighttime because it's easier to find the landing zone. But we say don't use flares. Something's lit, we have gas on board. You guys know what happens from there. So we don't like flares. So if you can, and you know, I'm not sure if you guys were ever given, we can get some landing zone kits out to you guys. They're like weighted strobe lights, and they've got 5 lights in them. So you guys can, we can get you some of those. We give those out to our partners, and they're free of charge. So those are preferred. They're just safer and they're weighted, so we're not worried about them blowing around. Never point lights at the aircraft. We can't see NVGs, so if we're flying at nighttime, we have night vision goggles on if you're sitting up front with the pilot. And so we can't see blue or LED lights, so something just to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is if there's an ambulance, say we're flying at nighttime, we lay eyes on the scene, we identify it by the lights from the ambulance, that's great, keep them on. But as we're on approach, ask the ground crew to shut them off. It's less distracting for us. So this is what we show for our demo, like our picture to set up the landing zone kits that we have. So as you see here, there's 4 lights just outside of the perimeter, and then that 5th light, it's an off-colored light. That's going to be put up top at the what we would call like the top of the LZ, where the wind direction is coming from. If you can identify it and put that 5th light there, that's like in the perfect scenario. We don't absolutely need this to land, but it's just like kind of something to use as a reference for how to set it up. So LZ preparation, make sure any and all loose items are secured. So medical equipment, cases, bags, sheets. One of the biggest culprits are baseball caps. So sometimes people will like flip them backwards. They still can blow off. We always like to say just tuck them in your shirt. If you have sunglasses on, keep those on because sometimes little pebbles and stuff from the road can blow up and we don't want that to get in your eyes. Safe thing to do too is you can always just turn your back to the helicopter until they land. And then do not chase any loose items. So if you're landing the aircraft as the LZ coordinator, you want to stand outside of the 100 feet by 100 feet landing zone. Stand with your back to the wind. Look at the ground for any FOD. FOD is a term we use. It's foreign object debris. Anything, it's a fancy word for saying anything that can blow around and cause damage to you or to the helicopter. So look up, front, and back around. That's what we call our aerial free pathway. Again, if you see something, say something. No thing is silly. Like you might think like, oh, they're definitely gonna see that water tower. Just let us know, call it out. We are over communicators at UCAN. So we're out loud thinkers and we like to hear all the things. So make sure that our aerial pathway is obstruction free. Does anybody have questions so far? Am I doing okay? Talking too fast? Okay. So hot operations is what we call our operations when we leave the aircraft running. So likely what you guys would see us doing if we're landing on a scene. So if we're landing on a highway, we're landing on a backcountry road, anything like that, we are going to land, we're going to leave the aircraft running, and just it helps facilitate time to get us to the patient and get us out of the scene. So we always approach and depart the aircraft from the 10 and 2 position. The nose of the aircraft being 12 o'clock. The reason behind that is that allows our pilot to always see where we are. They've got a lot of blind spots in the back of the aircraft. So 10 or 2 o'clock is where we approach and depart. And if you guys are assisting us with loading the patient, sometimes if we have a patient who's a little bit heavier, we might need a little bit of help getting them through, say, a field or something like that. We've got 2 crew members who get really mad when I say this, but Terry and Alex are like 90 pounds soaking wet. So we have a heavy, if we have a heavier patient, they might need help loading the patient into the aircraft. So we're always going to approach from 10 and 2, and you're going to do so with the crew escort and pilot permission. So when they land today, I'm not sure if they're going to do hot operations today, but We're always gonna say we're departing from 10 and 2. We're gonna look for a thumbs up from our pilot. That's them telling us, yes, it's safe to enter underneath the blades, and then same thing when we're coming back in. They give us a thumbs up, yes, it's okay to enter back. And then the other stuff, that's mostly just for us, but we have an IV pole in the stretcher. It needs to remain below shoulder height. And then sometimes we might ask you guys, so say you're on the ground and you're the LZ coordinator, you've got communications with the aircraft, we might ask you to set up a tail guard, and the reason being is sometimes that's one of our biggest blind spots, and especially the pilot. So if there's a lot of people on the scene, people want to know what's going on, it just keeps people safe and away from the tail of the aircraft. That's the most dangerous part. We have an open tail rotor back there, and so any of us really, you don't even have to be tall, you could walk into it. And so we might assign a tail guard as well. So patient preparation. So what does that handover look like? You've called the aircraft, the pilot's accepted, now you've set up your landing zone, and now you're ready to start prepping for handing over patient care. So what does that look like? Never bring the patient directly to the helicopter, we're gonna come to you. Everybody's got a different preference. I personally like to keep, I like when the ground crews keep the patient in the back of the ambulance. It allows us to hear truly a report on what was going on. When do errors happen? A breakdown of communication, right? So if we're in the back of the ambulance, receiving report from the ground crew, I can hear what actually happened. My partner can hear what happened. We can identify, do we have to do any further interventions right now, or can we package up and go? So in that, we're going to address any life threats, airway, breathing, circulation, all the basic things. We're going to get a brief patient report. We always like to say, if we're not making direct eye contact with you, please don't think we're not listening. We're doing and moving at the same time just to facilitate getting the patient to the trauma center likely, or wherever they need to go. So we're going to do a quick patient assessment in the ambulance or at the scene, depending on what the ground crew decides. And then we're going to move to the UCAN litter or our stretcher. So patient loading, we're going to brief the ground crew on how we want to do this. Sometimes we might ask for help, sometimes we might not. But if you are helping us, we're going to brief you guys on what that looks like. We'll be responsible for opening all our aircraft doors. I always like to say there's really no unified or uniform process for this. Each crew is different, so like my preference, I usually like to bring 2 people with me and have them help kind of load. It makes things easier. But some people might say that, well, we're okay. Just follow the direction of the crew that's on that day. And then things you guys should know as our customers. So we can take multiple aircraft requests if needed. So say you guys were on scene, you can definitely land 2. There could be 2 patients that need to be flown, right? So if you called our dispatch directly and said, hey, UCAN, I need 2 helicopters. We've got 2 really sick people, 2 really sick patients out here. This is what the scene looks like. We can facilitate that so you're not calling multiple programs. So say you were up here and you were like, we want UCAN to come out. We can call for the helicopter in Rockford too. You guys don't have to make multiple phone calls. If we are busy or out of service, like I mentioned earlier, we kind of use the phone tree system and we help still get the patient what they need. And so we can call for another program if we're busy or we're out of service or we're down for maintenance or something like that. And then if there's ever an on-scene arrest, so that really truly is the only patient that we're never going to put into the helicopter. If a patient is requiring CPR, and so if we are en route to you and say the patient's status changes and they're peri-arrest, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to cancel us. We want to partner with you guys and help get the patient what they need. So what that looks like is usually patients peri-arrest. We can go to the local level 1 trauma center, so we can go by ambulance to Lutheran. We'll bring our blood cooler with, and if they need blood, we'll start that on the way, and then we can ditch our pilot, and then they could come pick us up from Lutheran, if that were the scenario. So something to keep in mind too. So staging of the aircraft, if there's ever a need for 2 helicopters, like we mentioned, that can obviously happen. Just know that, generally speaking, it's more dangerous. There's going to be 2 aircraft in one area. If you have the resources on the ground to establish 2 separate temporary landing zones, definitely do that. Then that allows both of them to land. If you don't have enough ground crew to establish 2 separate landing zone coordinators, 2 people to kind of coordinate operations around the landing zone, then you can set up 1 that's totally fine. Just let us know, hey, we only have 1 landing zone. But what that's gonna look like then is the first crew that gets there is gonna land, they're gonna take the sicker patient, they're gonna hurry up, leave, and then the other aircraft can then land and pick up the other
I have a
patient.
question. If we have to set it up 2 landing zones, how far away has to be one from the other?
That's a good question. At least 100 feet.
I don't know.
Yes, there are hospitals that have helipads that are both next to each other. As long as our pilots know that there's gonna be another aircraft, they can see each other on radar, and they can communicate amongst each other, so that's something that'll help keep us safe. But at least 100 feet, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. That we covered. So helicopter shopping, this is just something to keep in mind. It's one of the most dangerous parts of kind of calling out an aircraft, and it does cause helicopters to crash and go down. And basically what helicopter shopping is say that you're on a scene or you're working in a hospital, and every program has different safety standards. Or human error is a thing too. So say our pilot was to check and say, hey, no, the ceilings are low, meaning the clouds, it's not safe for us to fly. If you're calling for another program, it's not necessarily that you can't call, it's just that you should disclose that information. Hey, we already called for UCAN, they turned it down for weather from this area, and so, if a flight program is responding from another town or another city out in the community, they're not going to have the same weather we have from Chicago, but just make sure you disclose that information. And then, we like to say don't continuously keep calling. If a program has turned it down and a second program has turned it down, it's not safe to fly. So let's not put another team in harm's way. Okay, so crash recovery. This will be for anybody in the audience that is, EMS in terms of works for a fire department, things like that. If you were responding to a crash that involved us. So this could be either a hard landing or a crash landing. What differentiates the two is the monetary damage to the aircraft. So it could either be not that bad or pretty bad, basically, is what that means. Sometimes we can make a precautionary landing, so say we had a mechanical issue or something that was kind of concerning, doesn't put us in immediate danger, but it needs to be checked out, we'll make a precautionary landing. Common causes of reasons for landing: bird strikes, wire strikes, or if we have a mechanical issue. So if you were responding to us, what would you expect? Anything from minor injuries all the way up to fatalities. The aircraft may still be intact and running, or completely destroyed. It might be fatalities are obvious. If you can get the attention of the pilot, wave them down and have them shut down the aircraft before you approach. We still always say 10 and 2 positions are the safest because the tail rotor can still be spinning. It is considered a hazmat scene, and we'll go through what we have on board. And then also a crime scene. So anytime there's an aircraft crash that happens, the NTSB comes out and does a full investigation. So if you can, protect the scene. If it's obvious that there are survivors, definitely get us out. Don't worry about the scene. But if it's obvious that there were fatalities, just protect the scene. Make sure that nothing gets disrupted with it. So what are the hazmat dangers on board? So the aircraft itself is made of steel, aluminum, and fiberglass. We do have Jet A fuel on board. Engine oil, hydraulic oil. We have portable and onboard oxygen, so we have gases on board. Depending on what type of patient we're transferring, sometimes we might have more gases. So meaning helium, nitric, or Flolan, we might have those on board as well. That's some information that you can get from our dispatch. Just a quick phone call, hey, what was the team transporting, what gases do they have on board? So assess the scene. Scene safety is always the priority. We hear that a lot in EMS. Avoid turning rotors, extinguish the fire, all kind of basic, obvious things. Approach from 10 and 2, and then again, protect the wreckage from damage and document what you see at the scene. We talked about extrication. I love that you guys all have our phone number. That's our phone number for UCAN dispatch, so if anybody wants to save that, you can take a picture. And then, so say, you were responding to, does anybody need me to go back?
One more.
One more, yeah.
We'll
Wanna call us
we'll
in?
include it in the email and follow up.
Yes.
Big bold print.
I have another slide on here too, I think, with our phone number.
I have a weird question. So, God forbid that you do crash.
Mhm.
When you say, and it may land in a different position than the landing, and you're going into the air, the 10 and 2 would be at the front of your landing zone.
Yes.
Are you still going to approach into that 10 and 2, or are you going to approach, I mean,
I would still approach from 10 and 2 because
from the
we don't
landing
know,
position?
yes, even from the side, only because we still have that open tail rotor in the back. If it's clear that the wreckage was, pretty bad and significant in the damage, not likely that it's gonna be still running, but I still would say just for safety, like approach from the front or like the nose of the aircraft, the 10 and 2 position. So you guys come up on scene, say, first try the doors to get us out if there were survivors. So this picture here on the left is what our doors look like, closed and locked. And then the picture on the right, you flip the lever to the right and down, and that pops it open. And then it kind of slides backwards or towards the back like a van door. And then if for whatever reason the handles did not work, or there was enough damage to where it wouldn't open, you can use our emergency, like our window exit. So this lever up here, red lever, you flip it up, it breaks that black weather stripping around the window. You push the targets, it's just a fiberglass window, it pops right out. On the inside, it's the opposite. The lever's still up top, you flip it up, it breaks the weather stripping, and then you push the 2 red targets, there's stickers on where to push, okay? And then what do you shut down if you're able to gain access inside of the aircraft? So first thing you want to shut off fuel, for sure. We are a 2-engine aircraft, so there's 2 buttons to push, but it's the 2 red cages. Anything red usually means bad. So flip those up, you press the 2 buttons, that activates our fuel suppression system in the helicopter. So push those, shuts down the fuel. Next thing you're gonna want to shut off is the battery. So that yellow lever in the middle, you flip it down, it says off, and then our oxygen. So oxygen is up above the pilot's left shoulder. It's the only red lever that you're gonna flip. So back is off. So first thing, fuel, battery, and then oxygen. Fuel, battery, oxygen, there's a quiz later. And then that is mostly what I have for you guys. So at UCAN, we have an excellent safety record. I like to always mention too that we are a 4 to go and 1 to say no program. So even if the pilot were to say, yes, it's safe for us to fly, if I felt like something was wrong, there's a lot of studies out there that talk about like gestalt, right? Something doesn't feel right, something feels off, I don't like this. I'm not gonna be forced to fly if I don't feel safe. And then we're not penalized for that. So 4 to go, 1 to say no, that includes our 2 nurses, our pilot, and our dispatcher. If our dispatcher sees something, it's kind of like you're looking at all point of views. Like, I don't like the way this looks, or this doesn't sound right. They can also say no.
Have you ever had that happen?
We have, yes. Yes, we've had it where, not in like an alarming, way, but where, say, we've gotten out to a referring hospital and the ceilings changed. Weather changes around here really quickly. And the crew was like, you know what, can you send us an ambulance? We're going to wait. The pilot's going to wait out the weather. We had a situation towards the end of the summer where a flight that I was on where we landed, it was for a patient who was involved in a GSW, a gunshot wound, and this hospital security was not outside, and so there was a very large amount of people outside. I was like, I don't know who those people are, but they're approaching the aircraft and I want to leave. I don't feel safe. And so it doesn't feel good, but at the end of the day, I'm like, I want to go home to my family too. So we're all encouraged to say no if we don't feel safe. And like we talked about, we fly to the closest and most appropriate facility. Sometimes we'll fly patients to Cook County. We'll fly to Loyola, whichever is most appropriate. We have flown to Lutheran a handful of times.
You guys land right on top of my building, where my at Good Sam.
Oh yeah, we actually fly there a decent amount. Mostly I feel like for pediatric trauma patients. But yeah. And ask questions if you're unsure. Any questions? Anything randomly that comes to mind?
Come on, guys, Hester, you need to ask questions. We got 10 minutes?
We've got-
You say you have the distance approximately 200 miles.
Yes.
You keep saying like Arlington Heights, what if you're much further? Let's say you're located in Ottawa, which is within 200 miles. Is there different dispatches down there, or how do you find out?
Is there different, what was the question?
Instead of going UCAN, is there like another 800 number, say, hey, I'd like you to drop Falls or Sterling, what I call?
Same phone number. Same phone number, yeah. I just use that as a reference because I'm less familiar with the northern suburbs. I'm more familiar with the southern suburbs, but just same phone number, same helicopter. If if we're out of service or we're out on another call and there's a closer helicopter, our dispatch can help facilitate getting that closer helicopter out to you guys. But yeah, same phone number.
And picture service dogs. If there is a special situation where there is a service dog, let's say patient flying and they have a big dog, how?
That's a good question. This has been brought up before, and I want to touch base with some of my colleagues that have been on the team longer. I'm almost positive that we transport service dogs as well, or we can, but I don't want to say yes for sure. Our lead pilot is on today, so that's something that we can ask him when he's out here.
Right now, but question for somebody is, handicap or vision impaired and they have their dog. They don't, because it's a crisis for the dog.
Right.
As well.
Yeah, that's something we can definitely clarify. I don't want to say it's for sure answer because I'm not 100% sure.
Have you ever had to deliver babies on board?
Oh gosh, no. No, I have not.
You said you had the ice sled.
No, I'm still flying. My coworkers just cross their fingers every time they work with me. No, as long as you, I'm joking, but.
May have to use the ice sled then.
Yeah, as long as we feel good and everything, we can still fly.
That close.
Yeah.
You guys have FLIR,
FLIR.
or looking at RIDE?
No. I've never heard of that, to be completely honest.
I mean, you said you had night vision, it's just, it uses thermal instead of.
Oh, no, we just have our night vision goggles.
Do you do ride-alongs by chance for EMS providers?
Yes. We actually get a decent amount of ride-alongs, so we do it for anybody who's in EMS, whatever, level. EMTs, nursing students we get sometimes, we get residents, so if you're interested, I can give you my card and we can set you up. It's really easy, you email one of our dispatchers. And I like when we have ride-alongs, it's a fun way to share what we do, and then, you get to ride the helicopter.
Is there a different number for the ride-along?
I have an email that I can give for ride-alongs, yeah. Heather, our dispatcher, she's great, she organizes all of that and gets people on the schedule pretty quickly, so.
You said you were responding to the Highland Park shooting?
Yes.
Where did you land?
We landed at North Shore, Highland Park. They have a separate, well, not specifically at the hospital because they don't have a helipad. They have one that is separate, and to be honest with you, I don't know, I think it was like maybe a mile and a half away. And so sometimes that's less common that hospitals have like a separate helipad. But we landed, it was like kind of in a woodsy area. They had an older helipad that I think hadn't been used in a while.
So they transported by ambulance.
So our dispatch, if they have all of that within our computer system, and so they were able to identify, North Shore Highland Park does not have a helipad, but this is where we land if we're called to that hospital. So then they'll call for an ambulance to get us to the hospital. So that's what we did.
Okay, so you go to the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope this was helpful.